Hey guys, welcome to episode 1 of Climbing the Curve. This is the first full episode after the pilot, and today it's going to be all about trade hubs. So why do they exist? What are the major trade hubs? And today we're also going to have our first interview guest, someone who recently copped the nickname Anaconda, the owner of the largest player-run trade hub in EVE, and probably one of the most interesting and talked about personalities in New Eden. More on that later. As promised, we will also have a look at one interesting data point in the EVE universe that we'll go over, and then I will also share one item or an item group that I have traded in that's made me a lot of money to get you going on your ISK making adventures. If you're joining us for the first time today, my name is Oz. If you don't already know me from Twitch or from YouTube, I'm a veteran EVE player with a focus on the markets and trading and the ecosystem of EVE. And I also run the EVE Investment Fund, which is a community mutual fund where I take about 1 trillion ISK from the EVE community and I invest it in the markets, sharing everything on stream and helping people to learn how to trade while we're at it. So let's jump right into our topic for the day. Trade hubs. If you've spent any time in EVE at all, you've probably come across one of the major trade hubs already. Chances are you also know what JITA is, but we'll talk about that later. So why do trade hubs exist in the game? Trade hubs exist in the game because we have players that are spread out all across the galaxy, and they are local miners, radders, mission runners, PvPers, and they don't always want to travel to the center of the galaxy to sell their stuff. So typically, they will go to the closest hub that they can see on the map, or that they've heard about, or where they see current orders, and they go there to sell it. So that way, it saves them time, and it's a big convenience. On the other hand, you have demand for local goods as well. You have people wanting to buy ships, wanting to buy modules, and other consumables to go after those activities, like mining, radding, mission running, PvPing, etc. In between all that, you've got traders and producers who are trying to profit from the supply and demand in the various different hubs. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to optimize the supply chain or the logistics between all the hubs. So the location and the amount of trade hubs you're going to find in this type of sandbox universe is going to depend not only on geography, but also on the value that players are going to place on convenience, and inversely, the amount of profit that traders and producers can make from shipping items from one trade hub to the other, or producing items in one trade hub or the other based on raw material prices. In the end, there are two reasons why inter-hub trade exists. One is the difference in supply of goods, so there might be different products up for sale because of various different LP stores or loot that might differ, or even minerals, which hasn't been much of an issue in the past, but will be a lot in the future with all the changes that are coming. And then you also have price difference. So a lot of times you have a price difference between the hubs, and you will have traders trying to capitalize on exactly that, because they can buy in one hub and sell in the other. And the question is always just, is it worth it to ship those items from one to the other? So essentially, is the price difference high enough for you to want to make that investment in time and effort? So let's talk about the different types of trade hubs. Most of the in-game trade happens at NPC trade hubs. So, for example, JITA, AMAR, Odo, Dixie. These are run by the different factions and are essentially safe from attack and have fixed brokerage fees that you can influence by your trading skills and faction standings. Then we have player-run trade hubs, so for example in a Keepstar or in a Sotio structure, and these are not only found in high-sec but also in low-sec and in null-sec, where alliances may have their own trade hubs. And the most famous one in high-sec is the Tranquility Trading Tower in Perimeter, which is one jump from JITA. That's the topic of our interview later in the show. The reason some players, especially high-volume traders, decide to trade out of a player-run hub is because these structures allow broker fees to be a lot lower than the fixed broker fees in NPC stations. So, for example, while the sales tax is fixed, the lowest broker fees that you can have at a player-owned station is 1%, half of which goes to the owner and half of which goes to an NPC corporation, so essentially out of the game. That compares to 3% with perfect skills and perfect standings in JITA. So in the end, you're going to be able to cut your broker fees to 1/3 just by moving the buy orders out to a player-owned station. The reason I say buy orders is because sell orders, most investors or most traders still don't move out to a player-run structure, because that would mean you having to put all the items in that player-run structure. Not only is that a risk, but it also means that you would have to find a buyer outside of the main trade hub, and that is a challenge because most players will still go to the main trade hub out of convenience to go shopping for modules, for ships, etc. So the optimal way that has developed over the years is putting your buy orders in a player run structure where you can set the range of the buy order to 1 jump, as we discussed in the pilot episode, and most of the time your order will still get fulfilled in the major trade hub and not 1 jump away. So let's have a look at what the trade hubs are in EVE Online. So you have JITA in the Forge region, of course. JITA's market volume is bigger than all of the other trade hubs combined. So if you're looking for a place where trades are happening, JITA is your bet. Some people will tell you that competition is way too high in JITA to make money. I always recommend to players, if you are only trading with one character, put it in JITA, because that's where everything happens and that's where you're going to have the most versatility in your investments and you're going to have the most opportunity to make money. So that's JITA. The second biggest trade hub is AMAR in the domain region. AMAR used to be the solid number 2. It has been impacted a little bit by the Nyarja incident, but not that much. So be on the lookout on maybe trade being reduced a little bit in AMAR, but still a big trade hub where lots of trade is happening. The third biggest is already the player structure in Perimeter, Tranquility Trading Hub, that we talked about in this episode today. It is essentially there because a lot of people are either putting buy orders in it for JITA, or because people are trading very, very high value items like Plex or injectors or extractors there to save and broker fees. The number 4 is Dodixie in the Cinq Liaison, the Galente region. Dodixie is already much smaller, but it has seen a recent uptick, so it's possible that we will see Dodixie playing a larger role in the future. You then have some smaller trade hubs that are Rennes or Heck in Heimatar or the Metropolis regions. And then you also have the Tranquility Trade and Production Center in Ashab, which is 1 jump from AMAR that we also talked about earlier, that still has a quite significant value. By the way, if you're looking for the hub that is 1 jump from Dodixie, then that is the I Choose You Market and Industry hub that is in Botane. And this is also a player-run structure. So if you're looking for a place to put your buy orders 1 jump out from Dodixie, then that is the place to go. Really excited today. As our first guest on the podcast ever, we have a very famous member of the community, a member of the CSM, the Player Representation Body, the leader of Test Alliance Please Ignore, who are currently involved in a big war, as most of you will know. And more importantly, he is also the manager and owner of the Tranquility Trading Tower, the structure in Perimeter that I always tell you guys to put your buy orders in. So, Vily, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question I have is really behind the motivation of launching the Tranquility Trading Tower. I mean, I imagine it's not only a lot of work, but also very exciting. So can you tell me a little bit about why did you start it? What was the motivation in the beginning, and how did you go about it?
Well, the history of the Tranquility Trading Tower dates back to before there was a TTT. At the time, it was a kind of series of Fortizars that was controlled by a variety of groups, primarily at the time when we took it, I Choose You, who were being backed by Pandemic Horde at the time. And as part of a military campaign, we saw an opportunity to take that asset off the board for Pandemic Horde, and we moved up into Losec near there and began sieging the structures in perimeter. We cleared the vast majority of them, and we were then in the process of setting up our own Fortizar when we became aware that a Keepstar was for sale nearby, formerly the All-Yunin Keepstar that Matterall was selling that day. Basically, he had kind of mentioned it. We're like, oh, let's just go grab that and do it that way. And that
Nice.
is kind of the way in which the TTT became a Keepstar more than anything. Obviously, we would have preferred to start with a Keepstar if we had one, but obviously we didn't at the time, just because it's so much more of a kind of permanence symbol than your standard Fortizar, and obviously there's a massive amount of strategic benefits to utilizing a Fortizar compared to a Fortizar. Obviously, we did this with the intent of taking, an asset off the board for Horde and taking it for ourselves, and over time, our feelings and kind of interaction with the towers itself has kind of evolved, I guess, and we now try to offer a service to all of New Eden rather than just try and hold this structure that makes us some money.
So the early motivation was more, taking something from an enemy, but today it's mostly about making money, right?
It's all about making money. I mean, don't get me wrong. If it didn't make money, nobody'd be here. But the ability to provide kind of a safe haven and a service, and the opportunity to kind of give back a little bit to the community by providing things that they might not otherwise be able to have. It's definitely a small component of it as well. There's a certain reward to helping out, and as a big alliance that's always focusing on political means, sometimes it's preferable to do that.
Not to go on this question already this early, but I'm sure a lot of people are wondering or know this already. But can you talk a little bit about the revenue structure and who it gets paid out to?
Yeah, so when we originally put up the tower, it was just test. But as soon as Horde was no longer distracted with what they were doing at the time, they began to try to take back their asset, and eventually we were put in a position where we were engaged in war over the Tranquility Trading Tower. And that resulted in kind of this constant stream of battles that took place for the better part of a month and a half, I believe, between Test and the Imperium and PL and NC and Horde and all the rest. And the combat meta for HiSec was just not very fun, let's say. A lot of the tactical strategies are just it evolves basically to two people fighting in the mud, and a decision was made that we would kind of, rather than fight each other for it, we would collaborate and split the profits so that all sides would receive some revenue, and that would make the tower that much more safer, because then you've removed the vast majority of large possible attackers. You provide stability. You enable the tower to be, to a degree, almost unattackable, unassailable. And so that would, in essence, the theory was create enough stability that we could, over time, grow the market and create a stable trading platform that people would choose to use.
And it sounds like that's working, right? Because we have a big war going on right now, and it's still standing. So it seems like the plan is working, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The original revenues of the TTT when we took it from Horde were, about 1/3 to 1/4 of where the revenues are at now. So we've definitely grown the market over time. Obviously, the Plex and injector trade is moderately stable, although that has grown as well as people are more able to rely on the TTT always being there and they don't have to utilize JITA. But the biggest area of growth we've seen over the last year or so has been in the large manufacturable index. So like the your titanium and your compressed ore and all the big items that people generally aren't super happy to move into Jita, because usually they're coming right back at Jita to be produced with. So that's been the biggest area we've seen market growth, but obviously there's a burgeoning market for ships, for modules, etc. We're never gonna, well, I shouldn't say we're never gonna compete with Cheetah, but we're certainly not competitive with Cheetah for those things right now. But as we continue to work towards the future, that's definitely a possibility or something we hope for.
And did the market patch in March? I imagine that also increased your revenues, right? If you're saying that it used to be about a quarter of where it's at now, but relisting fees and those changes in March, they must have helped, right?
They helped a little bit, but not as much as most people kind of assume. The relisting fees don't actually add up to all that much for actual like trading revenue. The 0.003 or whatever it is of the cost, it just it doesn't add up to a ton from what I've seen. I don't think our revenues increased by more than 5 or 10% with that patch.
Okay, but you've had to increase the fee to 1%, half of which is going out of the game now. So that increased it a little bit, right? The revenues.
The minimum is now 1% with half going to CCP,
Yeah.
meaning that we get 0.5% of the tax revenue. I know that it used to be a 0.03, and then the other kind of partners, owners of the tower had kind of said, it'd be better if it was higher. And my original thoughts of Mitani and Vince never being on the same page because they were blood enemies at the time, was obviously kind of changed, let's say. So then the tax went up. So it was either a 0.4 or 0.3 when that patch hit. So I don't think there was actually a large growth in revenue. Since the only real area where it really helped us was it essentially forced a lot of the competition out of the market, because all of the spam trade as bells that would be undercut us could no longer undercut us since we were now at the minimum, and nobody's going to go bother put their stuff in some random trade citadel unless it's their own, when that trade citadel is going to die in a week. So
All right. So talking about other citadels or other structures in space, there are a few I choose you structures all around New Eden, but you clearly have the market in Jita and in the AMAR space, right? So how do you handle competition?
So basically, the Tranquility Trading Corporation operates entirely in the Forage region, with a minor kind of arm in Igniting to, ensure logistical supply chains from nullsec to perimeter. Every other region in the game, aside from domain, is we don't touch. And for the most part, that means that I Choose You manages those regions, and I think he does that with the support of Horde and a variety of high-sec mercenaries, and he runs a pretty solid business. He operates a little differently than we do, but he's a businessman and hard to do. So he's got a good control over all of the other regions. Domain is not operated by the Tranquility Trading Corporation itself, although it is part of the consortium, and that Sotio is run by a merge, like a number of groups that is kind of spearheaded by Goonswarm. So the domain one is primarily their baby.
So speaking of AMAR, I've talked about on my stream quite a bit about the impact that the Niarja incidents had. Are you seeing any effects there?
Almost none, honestly. I think people expected that all of the trade would just dry up and that half of the galaxy's resources would just stop coming into the primary hub of the game. But the reality is, people still have jump freighters, and anything that needs to be moved can be moved. And on top of that, it's not just a matter of resources, but it's also a matter of customers, right? And it means that a lot of the customers that traditionally would be buying an AMAR are no longer buying an AMAR because they can't get there easily and they don't want to go there. So, while the supply may have gone up, the demand has gone down. And from what I've seen, for the most part, the curve has not changed drastically. And in the ways that it has, it's usually been negative for the domain regional market. I don't know what data you have. I haven't
Yes, we haven't seen any dramatic changes in the data for sure. What I figured it would come down to is local demand. If you see the local demand, then AMAR will survive the way it has been surviving. But there are a lot of factors impacting the demand that is coming from outside of the region, and that's just it's going to have to go down. So overall, there's in my eyes, there's no way that AMAR is not going to lose business over this. So trade volume basically, but that doesn't mean that the hub is dying because there's local demand there. There's people there. It's just not going to be as big as before. It just means that the TTT might catch AMAR as based on volume as the second highest trade up.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are working towards it. We've kind of got a long-term strategy that we're taking to do that. My guess is that AMAR will stabilize at some point. It might lose another 5 or 10%, but it is still kind of its own market, and when there is demand, supply will rush to meet it in EVE Online. People will go where the profit is, and if the customers are there, people will find a way.
Absolutely. So you briefly mentioned Ignoiten there. I wanted to ask you about that anyway, because not only is there, I think there's a Triglavian invasion going on right now, but that would matter a lot if it had already built up as a huge trade hub, but that hasn't really panned out yet, has it?
No, so I had higher hopes for what Ignoiten would become. I had hoped that I could build this kind of burgeoning low sec market and see how I don't know, trying to do nice things, make some money, and provide things that otherwise people wouldn't have. So obviously the reactor there is getting some business, but it's not making near as much money as I would have hoped, although it has had a drastic effect on composite reactions and the price of some components in JITA. So I'm happy to have made that kind of minimal difference. The capital production facility sees some use, although not near as much as I would have hoped. And obviously the Keepstar sees some super trading. But once again, I kind of a higher dream in terms of how much activity we would see, and I think that's just a function of the way LoSec works, that it's not more. But regardless, once you make the initial investment with these things, for the most part, they're very how would I say this?
Low maintenance.
They're low maintenance. Yeah, that'd be like I got to do some work jump rating of fuel every once in a while, but for the most part, that's pretty tolerable, I guess you would say. It's something I'm not unused to doing at this point.
And while Ignoiten is low maintenance, I imagine the Triple T isn't really, right? You have to put in quite a bit of work, or is it just something you do in 5 minutes every day?
It's a little bit of both. It is what you make of it. I could certainly just load it up with fuel for a year, which it is currently actually. But there's a ton of different ways in which you can kind of work on the maintenance that all play a role. The maintenance of the diplomatic relations is a big one. Obviously, I stock the kind of cache of ships that protects the TTT, and the the building of thousands of Feroxes has not been a convenient process, let's say. But there's a variety of things I do that I don't always necessarily want to talk about, but are useful. And obviously, I enjoy the trading game a little bit and use that character to do so from time to time. It's good.
Cool. So where do you see it going? I mean, the obligatory question is, we have a war. It's apparently the agreement is surviving. There are people saying, hey, this is all that's wrong with EVE because it's existing despite the war. You can also look at it in terms of, it's the one is business, the other is war. So where do you see it going?
So at the moment, obviously, my hope is that it continues to survive throughout the war. That would be obviously the first goal. I'd rather if it didn't just get itself killed. And obviously, even if things took a turn for the worst, I'm not necessarily sure that would happen. But certainly it's a possibility. But in terms of the long term, I would absolutely, the goal that we're kind of pushing towards is trying to supplement JITA bit by bit. We still got to overcome AMAR, but the reality is JITA will come, beating JITA will come pretty naturally if once you can hit the kind of point where people can reliably get everything they want from one location, then why would they go to the other, right? So our goal has kind of been working towards gaining control of market segments one by one, bit by bit. And, we're starting to do that in a lot of the industrial sectors. And if we can really get control of enough of them, then bit by bit we'll probably see a larger percentage of that production continuing to move to perimeter, which will mean more of the ships are reliably viable there, and bit by bit, we move up the chain. And we've got a couple plans to kind of spiral that movement into a much quicker situation, but for the most part, we're taking it very slow. It's kind of a 5-year plan and working towards our goals.
It could be argued that allowing more competition to exist would actually quicken the transition from JITA to player structures, because the way it is now, there's still going to be, I don't know if it's a majority or it's probably a minority, but of people saying, well, I don't want to transfer everything to the Triple T because I don't want to hand over all of my money to the big null alliances.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think they're right to a degree. I wouldn't necessarily want to fund people I don't like either. But, most people don't like, big banks in real life either, right? But they still recognize that the big banks are where you want to invest your money. And, we kind of aim to operate in that kind of same method to a degree where, regardless of what you think about us, we are the best business practice for the day. We're the best place to invest your money. We're the safest place to trade. We are old reliable, old faithful kind of thing. And obviously, if there were more player run structures, then sure, there's more opportunities for competition. But the player trading market, how would I call this? The amount of people willing to trade in player markets is not large enough that I think it would matter. Like all we would be doing is splitting off the 10 or 15% of people that are trading in those markets into, progressively smaller groups, which would then, diminish overall what we're trying to do.
It's quite possible that that was my stream. I'm converting about a dozen people a day towards the Triple T.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Like, sometimes it's just about, people looking at something and realizing, maybe they're not that bad. Maybe they're just trying to do business, right? And I think, I know for us, the goal isn't to, represent our nullsec alliance. Like, the goal is just to provide a good business. That's all the TTT is trying to do. It's to say, you want to trade, here's a good place to do it. And if you want to, your stuff is safe, we offer the best, we can do for that. Because obviously, any player station in HiSec has got a significant amount of vulnerabilities that are going to draw attention. So if we, say we're the safest and it's not even close, then people might go, oh, okay. And if at the same time we're operating the best business practices, we're operating, the cleanest operation with the lowest margins, it's kind of the dream world in business, right? Offer the best service at the best price. Usually you don't get that, but that's kind of what we aim to do. And obviously, we have people who aren't our fans because either they're jealous or they're interested in kind of jumping in on our market share, or they, truly think that we are something that is not good for the game, which in some cases is their opinion. It doesn't change the fact that we're just going to continue to try and sit here and do what we can do.
Do you think you're good for the game?
Absolutely. I don't even think it's a question. I think a lot of the discussion around are you good for the game, etc., generally comes from people who don't really understand either A, what we do, B, where and how the money, the revenue we generate is utilized, or people who really understand what it's like to be a new player anymore. Usually the people that complain about the TTT are people who don't, trade in stations, or who, trade out of JITA and, make no money. Like, it's hard for me to describe. Like I one thing I do as part of the, running the TTT is I generally talk to a lot of new players, newer traders, because I constantly get random emails on that character, and I generally try to answer them. And when I try to explain to them, it's like, if you trade here, it costs you this much less in tax, and it's to a degree almost the only way to be competitive. And, you can see that excitement in them, and you're like, I'm making a difference here. And the fact that they don't have to then worry about all their assets getting destroyed is a pretty big thing. So I'm not going to say we're perfect, but I definitely feel like we are better than all of the alternatives. And I think that the revenue that we generate leads to the health of the game in ways that most people don't really understand.
I mean, it's basically funneling high sec ISK to low sec, right? Where it's blown up or whatever.
Well, usually what it does is it takes the money that would be generated otherwise, and it puts it into Empire level Alliance wallets, and those wallets then are used to fund SRP programs where people go out and shoot stuff and have fun. Like, the fact that somebody might not like those alliances doesn't change the fact that for the most part, what we do is, for the most part, just help generate content in the galaxy.
Yeah, I think the last point is much better than the first, because, I mean, just by allowing people to keep more of the money that they trade with or that they play with, that's more of a game mechanic than an indicator of a healthy game, right? But if you're saying, in the end you're creating content because you're funneling ISK to people and programs that are able to create the content from people that are not able to create that type of content, then I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no single reason, right? And if you ever try to, say this is the reason we're good, usually that reason has a tendency to fall apart pretty quick. It's a variety of reasons why what we do is good. And obviously, our detractors will say that, we're bad, but I don't know what to say. It's when somebody calls you evil, what do you say? Just like, sorry, I'm just trying to do what I'm trying to do.
Well, I mean, in the end, it's also a game, and I think anyone that has the opportunity to create something extraordinary or something controversial or something like this, I wouldn't even think twice about doing something like that. So I think in the end, it also has to be seen in the context of, hey, it's a game, and it's something that people talk about, and just by it being discussed and being talked about, it's a great thing. By the way, I like your bank analogy because I think it's very fitting. People invest in banks. They don't really like banks. The only flaw in that analogy is that right now I think banks aren't the ones winning anymore. They're losing a lot of customers to fintech startups. So I'm waiting for that fintech startup to displace you guys.
I will not get into a long conversation with you about the viability of fintech startups, but suffice it to say, bring them on.
Well, that's a good last word then, Vily. Thanks so much for joining us today, for being the first guest on the show. Hopefully, the first of many, and looking forward to seeing you around. And whether you're for the TTT or against the Triple T, I think you can't deny that you are creating some good content and some good discussions. And yeah, thanks for always being a nice guy and always willing to talk to us. And good luck with everything.
Cheers. Thanks.
So because Vily was our guest this week, the profits that are made from the Triple T have to be the data point of the week, right? So I put an infographic out earlier this year that I also posted on Reddit that caused a lot of discussions, where the idea behind was that I wanted to show a data point about a part of EVE that not a lot of people think about. So back then I said that the revenues were about 2.2 trillion a month. By now, I've talked to a lot of people about it, had a lot of discussions, including one with Vily, and the actual number may be a little bit lower, but the fact of the matter is it's a lot of cash that is generated there every month, and it will probably be between 1.5 and 2 trillion, depending on whether they're having a good or a bad month and whether people are trading a lot or not. So that's just something that, I'm not going to say is good or bad based on the discussion today, but it's something that is important for you to know and to consider when you're out there trading and out there making decisions on how you're going to play the game. So the item group I want to recommend today as a great trade item is Abyssal Filaments. Abyssal Filaments are used in the game to enter Abyssal Space, a PvE part of the game that is a ton of fun. I can only recommend you try it. They come in 7 different difficulty tiers, so tier 0 to tier 6, and each of these tiers have 5 different weather patterns. So for example, exotic, gamma, or dark. These filaments are great for 3 reasons. 1, not only are they used to enter Abyssal Space, but they're also dropped from Abyssal Space. So you will have plenty of people running these PvE rooms, looting these Abyssal Filaments and then dropping them on the markets. The drops are not always the drops that you're looking for, so the drops can be any tier or any weather pattern. So a lot of people just, at the end of their day, when they're done running these filaments, they dump the filaments on the market. That means you have a ton of trade, lots of buy orders being fulfilled, lots of sell orders being fulfilled, and typically that's a great indication of margins, of product moving. So it's a lot of turnover on the market, lots of money-making opportunities for you. The second reason is that they come in these different tiers. So no matter how big your investment is that you want to make, or the capital is that you have to invest, you can always find one that is that fits your wallet. So if you're just starting out, you can try tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, because they are typically quite cheap. And if you want to invest large sums of money, you can go to tier 4, tier 5, and tier 6. The third reason why they're such a great trade item is their price volatility. So a lot of these are fluctuating in price quite frequently because the meta changes. Each of the Abyssal weather patterns have different buffs or debuffs to certain modules or ship attributes. So whenever there's a new ship or a module released, or whenever there is a patch in the game that changes certain attributes, the meta changes and the price for these Abyssal Filaments varies with it. So my recommendation would be, before you start trading in these, actually go out and experience Abyssal Space. It's going to make you understand the market a whole lot better. And besides that, it's fantastic PvE content that is tons of fun. So go out there, have some fun, and then get rich off of trading these Abyssal Filaments. All right, that wraps up episode 1 of Climbing the Curve. Thank you all for tuning in. If you want to check out my other content, you can find me on Twitch at Oz_Eve or on YouTube/OzEve. And if you like what I'm doing here, then I would appreciate your support on patreon.com/OzEve. Thank you to all the patrons out there, and thank you specifically to the Tycoons, Reinhold, Frosty Goblin, Xena Jax, Laddie, The One Valentine, Oniku, Giri, and Rashid. Without you guys, this wouldn't be possible. Make sure you guys also join our Discord. You can find it linked on pretty much all the channels and in the show notes. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and you all go out there and make that ISK.